The Great Hall of Concordance Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. Its floor could hold 1,000,000 beings standing shoulder to shoulder. And at this moment, representatives from 847 different species filled its seats, their voices creating a sound like distant thunder. Ambassador Kethvoron of the Dominion of Tal stood at the central podium. He was tall and thin, with gray skin that shifted colors when he spoke. His people had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and he carried that weight in every word. 300 years, he said, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast space. For 300 years, we have extended the hand of friendship to the species called humanity. For 300 years, that hand has been ignored. He pointed toward a section of seats near the back of the hall. They were empty. They had always been empty. A small sign marked them with a symbol that few beings recognized anymore, a blue and green circle that represented a planet called Earth. We discovered them. We invited them to join our great civilization. We offered them trade, technology, and protection. Kethvoron's skin flushed a darker shade. And what did they give us in return? Nothing. Not a single representative. Not a single word of explanation. Just silence. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many species had forgotten that humanity even existed. They were a footnote in galactic records, a primitive civilization on a small planet in an unremarkable star system. They had never attended a single meeting of the Galactic Assembly. They had never responded to any communication beyond simple automated messages, confirming that they had received the transmission. I move that we revoke humanity's membership, Kethvoron announced. Their seat has been empty long enough. Their allocated trade routes and resource rights should be redistributed among species that actually participate in galactic affairs. A representative from the hegemony of Krull stood to support the motion. So did voices from the Trade Consortium and the Outer Rim Coalition. Within minutes, it became clear that the vote would pass easily. Few species cared about humanity, and those who did saw an opportunity to claim valuable resources. Ambassador Yevanara of the Collective of Shao watched the proceedings with quiet concern. Her people were small and peaceful, and they had learned long ago to stay silent when the great power spoke. But something about this vote bothered her. She had studied the old records about humanity, and she had always wondered why a species capable of receiving galactic communications had chosen to ignore them completely. It made no sense. Even the most primitive civilizations jumped at the chance to join the galactic community. The technology alone was worth any price. Trade with other species could transform an economy overnight. Protection from predatory empires was essential for survival. So why had humanity said nothing for 300 years? The vote was called. 841 species voted to revoke humanity's membership. 3 abstained. 3 voted against, including Yevanara's people. None of that mattered. The motion passed by an overwhelming margin. Kethvoron allowed himself a thin smile. The trade routes allocated to humanity passed through valuable space, and his dominion was positioned to claim the largest share. This had been a good day. Let the record show that humanity's membership in the Galactic Assembly is hereby terminated, he announced. Their allocated resources will be redistributed according to standard protocols. This matter is, he stopped. Every light in the great hall flickered. The background hum of the station systems changed pitch. Representatives looked at each other in confusion. Then the station's artificial intelligence spoke. It had a calm, neutral voice designed to deliver information without causing panic. But there was something in its tone that made every being in the hall fall silent. Attention. Gravitational anomalies detected in surrounding space. Multiple hyperspace exit signatures confirmed. Unknown vessels entering local space. Kethvorin's skin went pale. How many vessels? Counting. A pause that lasted 3 seconds, an eternity for an advanced AI. Count complete. 1,024 vessels have exited hyperspace. They are forming a spherical pattern around this station. Chaos erupted. Representatives shouted questions. Some tried to flee toward the exits. Security forces moved to maintain order. Through it all, Kethvorin stood frozen at the podium, his mind refusing to accept what the AI was telling him. "Show me," he ordered. A massive holographic display materialized in the center of the hall. Every being fell silent as they saw what was happening outside. Ships. More ships than anyone had ever seen in one place. They hung in perfect formation around Concordance Prime, each one keeping exactly the same distance from the station and from each other. The precision of their arrangement was almost beautiful. But it was the ships themselves that caused representatives to gasp and tremble. They were huge. The smallest of them dwarfed the largest battleships in any galactic fleet. Their designs were unlike anything in galactic databases, smooth, elegant curves that somehow looked both advanced and ancient. They bristled with weapons that nobody could identify. They glowed with energies that nobody could explain. "Identify the vessels," Kethvorin demanded, his voice cracking. Unable to identify, the AI responded. "Design does not match any known species. Technology appears to be several centuries beyond galactic standard. Power signatures suggest weapons capabilities that exceed theoretical limits. Where did they come from? Trajectory analysis indicates they came from the same origin point." Another pause. "They came from the Sol system. They came from Earth." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For a long moment, the only sound in the great hall was the quiet hum of the holographic display. And then the ships began to broadcast. The same message on every frequency, in every language known to the galactic database. A simple phrase that would change everything. "Humanity requests the floor." Kethvorin felt his legs go weak. He gripped the podium to keep himself standing. Around him, representatives who had spent centuries building empires and conquering worlds looked at each other with expressions he had never seen on their faces before. Fear. Pure and absolute fear. The humans had not ignored the galaxy for 300 years. They had been watching. They had been learning. They had been building. And now they were here. Ambassador Yevanara looked at the massive ships on the display, and despite everything, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope, because she had read the old records carefully, and she knew one thing about humans that the great powers had overlooked. Humans remembered. They remembered every kindness and every cruelty. They remembered who helped them and who hurt them. They remembered everything. And they had been watching the galaxy for 300 years. Yevanara wondered what they had seen. She wondered what they planned to do about it. And as she looked at the 1,000 battleships surrounding the station, she realized that the galaxy was about to find out. The great powers had spent centuries treating the weak as beneath their notice. They had exploited colony worlds and enslaved lesser species. They had broken treaties and silenced anyone who objected. They had done all of this while humanity watched in silence. And now humanity had come to speak. Kethvorin finally found his voice. "Open a channel. Ask them what they want." "Channel open," the eye reported. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a human voice filled the great hall. It was calm and clear, with an accent that nobody recognized. It belonged to someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. "We apologize for our long absence. We had much work to do, but we are ready now." A brief pause. "We have been watching your proceedings. We understand that you have just voted to revoke our membership in this assembly. We would like to appeal that decision." Kethvorn swallowed hard. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that we have something important to say." Another pause. "And we believe the galaxy needs to hear it." The holographic display shifted. One of the massive ships moved forward from the formation, a flagship even larger than the rest, its hull covered with symbols that nobody could read. A small shuttle detached from it and began its descent toward Concordance Prime. "We are sending a representative," the voice continued. "We request that the assembly remain in session until she arrives. After 300 years, we believe you can wait a few more minutes." The channel closed. The shuttle grew larger on the display as it approached the station. And in the Great Hall of Concordance Prime, over 800 species waited in terrified silence for humanity to finally take its seat. The empty chairs in the back of the hall no longer looked like a symbol of absence and failure. They looked like a throne that had been waiting for its rightful owner. And that owner was coming. 300 years earlier, the message had arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Sarah Chun was the first human to read it. She was working at a radio telescope facility in the mountains of Chile, monitoring signals from deep space. When her computer flagged an unusual transmission, she almost ignored it. Unusual signals happened all the time: cosmic noise, equipment glitches, satellite interference. But this signal was different. It was structured. It repeated. And when she ran it through translation algorithms, it became words. "Greetings to the civilization of Earth. You have been observed and deemed worthy of contact. The Galactic Assembly invites you to join our community of species. Respond to this message to begin the process of integration." Within hours, the message had reached every government on Earth. Within days, the world's leaders gathered in secret to discuss their response. Within weeks, they had made a decision that would shape the next 3 centuries of human history. They would not respond. Not yet. The decision was not made out of fear or ignorance. Earth's leaders were neither stupid nor cowardly. They read the message carefully. They studied the information it contained about galactic civilization. They analyzed everything they could learn about the species that had sent it. And what they learned terrified them. The galaxy was not a peaceful community of enlightened beings. It was a jungle. The strong preyed on the weak. Empires rose and fell. Species were enslaved, exploited, and sometimes exterminated. The Galactic Assembly was not a government. It was a negotiating table where predators divided up their hunting grounds. Earth's leaders understood this because humans had built similar systems throughout their own history. They recognized the patterns. They saw how power worked. And they knew that if humanity joined the galaxy as a weak and primitive species, they would be devoured. So they made a different choice. They called it the Quiet Directive. The plan was simple in concept, but vast in execution. Humanity would pretend to be too primitive to respond to galactic communications. They would appear disorganized and foolish. They would let the galaxy forget about them. And while the galaxy forgot, humanity would watch, learn, build. For 300 years, that is exactly what they did. The first generation focused on intelligence gathering. They built secret facilities that intercepted every galactic transmission they could detect. They learned the languages, the customs, the politics. They mapped trade routes and identified power structures. They came to understand the galaxy better than many of the species that lived in it. The second generation focused on technology. They studied every piece of galactic equipment they could acquire: crash probes, abandoned satellites, debris from distant battles. They reverse-engineered it all. Then they improved upon it. Within a century, human technology surpassed anything in the galactic databases. The third generation focused on building. Shipyards appeared in the asteroid belt, hidden behind carefully maintained sensor blindness. Factories grew on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Deep space stations were constructed in the dark mist between stars, invisible to any galactic observation. And the ships. Always more ships. Admiral Chen Wei-lin was born into the fourth generation of the Quiet Directive. Her great-grandmother had been Dr. Sarah Chun, the woman who first read the galactic message. Every generation of her family had served the directive. It was their purpose, their legacy, their sacred duty. Wei-lin had spent her entire life preparing for a day that might never come. She trained to command fleets that existed only in simulation. She studied galactic powers that she had never seen. She learned to think in centuries, to plan for outcomes that would affect beings not yet born. Now, at 63 years old, she finally received the message she had been waiting for. Admiral Chun, the Assembly has voted to revoke our membership. The moment has come. She was standing on the bridge of the Eternal Patience, humanity's flagship and the largest warship ever built by any species. Around her, officers who had trained their entire lives for this moment worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. Fleet status? She asked. All 1,024 vessels report ready for jump. Crews are at full strength. Weapon systems are online. We can execute on your command. Wei-lin nodded slowly. She walked to the main viewport and looked out at the assembled fleet. It stretched beyond the limits of vision, row after row of massive ships, each one carrying enough firepower to destroy a civilization. She thought about her great-grandmother, who had made the first choice. She thought about her grandmother, who had built the first secret factories. She thought about her mother, who had commanded the first prototype battleship. Every generation had sacrificed so that this generation could act. What's the situation at the Assembly? She asked. They've just finished voting. Ambassador Kethvorn pushed the motion through. 841 votes in favor of revoking our membership. How did the smaller species vote? Most voted with the major powers. They had no choice. But 3 abstained and 3 voted against. The collective of Shao was among those who opposed the motion. Wei-lin allowed herself a small smile. She had studied the collective of Shao. They were a gentle people who had suffered greatly under the great powers. They had resisted when they could and survived when they had to. Humanity had been watching them for a long time. And the Dominion of Tal? Leading the charge, as expected. Kethvorn has positioned his people to claim most of our allocated trade routes. He thinks he's about to get very rich. He's about to get something, Wei-lin said. I don't think it's what he expects. She turned back to face her bridge crew. These were the best officers humanity had produced in 300 years of preparation. They understood what was at stake. They understood why they had been building in silence while the galaxy forgot they existed. 3 centuries ago, my great-grandmother received a message from the stars. It was an invitation to join a community of civilizations. It promised trade, technology, protection. She paused, letting the weight of history settle over the bridge. What it actually offered was slavery, exploitation, a slow death dressed up as friendship. The powers that rule this galaxy don't want partners. They want prey. Wei-lin walked to the center of the bridge, where a holographic display showed the fleet's formation. We chose to refuse that offer. We chose to build something better. We chose to make ourselves strong enough that when we finally answered, we would not be prey. We would not be victims. We would be something the galaxy has never seen before. She looked at each officer in turn. A force strong enough to choose mercy. The bridge was silent. Every officer understood what that meant. They had built the most powerful fleet in galactic history. They carried weapons that could unmake worlds. They had spent 300 years preparing for war. But their purpose was not conquest. Their purpose was justice. They just voted to expel us from the galaxy, Wei Lin said. They don't know it yet, but they just gave us the perfect entrance. When we arrive, we won't be suppliants begging for membership. We'll be something far more interesting. She returned to the command chair and sat down. Her hands rested on the armrests, steady and calm. We'll be the galaxy's conscience. The voice that speaks for those who cannot speak. The force that finally holds the powerful accountable for their crimes. She entered her authorization code into the chair's console. All ships, prepare for synchronized hyperspace jump. Destination, Concordance Prime. Execute on my mark. The fleet hummed with power. 1,000 ships prepared to tear holes in the fabric of space and cross light years in an instant. Mark. Space folded around them. The stars stretched and blurred. And humanity, after 300 years of silence, went to answer the galaxy's call. They had been invited to join a galactic civilization. They were about to create a new one. The shuttle descended through the docking bay of Concordance Prime with perfect precision. It was small compared to the massive battleships outside, but its design was just as strange and beautiful. Smooth curves that seemed to flow like water. A hull that shifted colors as it moved. Technology that made the station's most advanced systems look like children's toys. Ambassador Kethvorin stood at the front of the crowd that had gathered to meet it. Behind him, representatives from every major power jostled for position. They wanted to see the human up close. They wanted to understand what they were dealing with. They were terrified. All of them. And they tried very hard not to show it. The shuttle's door opened without a sound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single figure emerged. Admiral Chen Wei Lin was not what they expected. She was not tall or physically imposing. She was an older woman with gray hair cut short and a face lined by decades of responsibility. She wore a simple uniform without medals or decorations. She carried no visible weapons. She looked, to galactic eyes, almost ordinary. But there was something in the way she moved. Something in the calm certainty of her gaze. She walked like someone who had already won and was merely completing the formalities. Behind her came 2 officers who served as her aides. They also carried no weapons. They also looked completely at ease in a room full of beings who could have killed them in a heartbeat, if they had dared. Kethvorin stepped forward to speak, but Wei Lin raised a hand to stop him. It was a simple gesture, but somehow it silenced the entire docking bay. "I know who you are," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried clearly. "I know who all of you are. We've been watching for a very long time." She began to walk past them, toward the great hall. After a moment of stunned hesitation, they followed her. They had no choice. She moved with the certainty of someone who knew exactly where she was going. "Ambassador Kethvorin of the Dominion of Tal," she said without looking back. 37 years ago, your fleet bombarded the colony world of Shethra. 14 million beings died. The official reason was that they failed to pay tribute. The real reason was that they discovered mineral deposits you wanted to control. Kethvorin's skin went pale gray. "How do you, Supreme Commander Vexner of the Hegemony of Kral?" Wei Lin continued walking. "Your people operate slave routes through the Outer Rim. Currently, you hold approximately 200 million beings in forced labor. You sell the ones who can't work to the food processing industry." Vexner made a sound that might have been a denial, but Wei Lin kept talking. "Trade Master Yelanek of the Trade Consortium. You've manipulated commodity prices to starve 3 different civilizations into submission over the past century. When they couldn't pay for food, you bought their planets for a fraction of their value." She reached the entrance to the Great Hall and finally turned to face them. Her expression had not changed. She looked at them the way a teacher might look at students who had failed a very important test. We didn't miss your meetings because we were primitive or afraid. We missed them because we were watching, learning, recording. We know everything you've done for the past 300 years. Every crime, every treaty you broke, every species you destroyed or enslaved. She reached into her uniform and pulled out a small crystal that glowed with inner light. This contains the evidence. All of it. Organized and verified and ready for the galaxy to see. The great powers looked at the crystal like it was a weapon pointed at their heads. In a way, it was. What do you want? HFY managed to ask. Wei Lin smiled. It was not a warm expression. I want to address the assembly. I believe I have the floor. She walked into the great hall without waiting for permission. The crowd parted around her like water around a stone. She made her way to the central podium, the same podium where HFY had stood moments ago, calling for humanity's expulsion. The holographic display still showed the 1,000 battleships surrounding the station. They hadn't moved. They hadn't fired. They simply waited. Wei Lin placed the data crystal on the podium and looked out at the assembled representatives. 847 species. More beings than she could count. All of them staring at her with mixtures of fear and curiosity and hope and dread. My name is Chen Wei Lin, she said. I represent humanity, and I'm here to tell you a story. She pressed a control on the podium, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed Earth, a small blue planet circling an ordinary star. 300 years ago, we received your invitation to join galactic civilization. We were honored, excited. We thought we were about to become part of something wonderful. The image changed to show galactic maps, trade routes, power structures. Then we looked more closely. We intercepted your communications. We studied your history. We learned how your civilization actually works. The display began showing images. Colony worlds being bombarded. Slave ships being loaded with prisoners. Species being exterminated while others watched and did nothing. We saw what you do to the weak. We saw how the powerful treat those who cannot fight back. We saw the truth behind your treaties and your trade agreements and your grand speeches about cooperation. Wei Lin's voice remained calm, but it carried the weight of centuries. And we decided we would not join you. Not as you were. Not as prey to be devoured. We would wait. We would build. And when we finally came, we would come as something else entirely. She gestured at the ships outside. We could destroy you. All of you. Our weapons are centuries ahead of anything you possess. Our fleet could sterilize every planet controlled by every power in this hall. We could make ourselves rulers of the galaxy by nightfall. The silence in the hall was absolute. But that is not why we built these ships. That is not why we spent 300 years in silence. We did not make ourselves strong so that we could become the next predator. We made ourselves strong so that we could finally afford to be kind. She held up the data crystal. This contains evidence of crimes committed by the major powers of this galaxy. Genocide, slavery, economic, warfare that starved billions. Broken treaties and murdered diplomats and species erased from existence. Wei Lin looked directly at HFY. We came here to fix this. Not to conquer, to fix. The great powers will answer for what they've done. The slave routes will be closed. The exploited colonies will be freed. The galaxy will be reorganized around principles that we humans learned through our own long and bloody history. She paused. Or you can refuse. You can try to fight us. You can try to destroy the evidence. You can try to continue as you always have. Her smile returned, still cold, still certain. But I wouldn't recommend it. The great powers looked at each other. They looked at the 1,000 ships outside. They looked at this small human woman who spoke like she had already won. And slowly, terribly, They began to understand what 300 years of silence had truly meant. The humans had been watching. The humans had been preparing. And now the humans had come to collect a very old debt. The Great Hall exploded into chaos. Representatives shouted in 100 languages. Some tried to flee toward the exits, pushing past each other in their panic. Others stood frozen, unable to process what they were hearing. The security forces that normally maintained order looked at each other in confusion, uncertain whether they should even try to control the situation. Through it all, Admiral Chun Wei-Lin stood calmly at the podium and waited. Ambassador Keth Vaughan was the first to recover. He pushed his way through the crowd and pointed a trembling finger at the human. "You can't do this. You have no authority here. The Galactic Assembly has rules, procedures, treaties that have stood for 10,000 years. Treaties you've broken whenever it suited you," Wei-Lin replied. "Rules that only apply to the weak. Procedures that protect the powerful and ignore everyone else." She shook her head. "We know your rules, Ambassador. We've been studying them for 3 centuries. And we've decided they need to change. This is an invasion," Keth Vaughan shouted. "An act of war against the entire galaxy. Is it?" Wei-Lin gestured at the holographic display. "Have we attacked anyone? Have we fired a single weapon? We came here to talk. We came here to present evidence. We came here to give the galaxy a choice." "What choice?" Supreme Commander Vexner of the Hegemony pushed forward. He was massive, covered in thick scales, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. "You arrive with a fleet that outnumbers every navy in the galaxy combined, and you talk about choice? This is conquest dressed in pretty words." Wei-Lin studied him for a moment. "Commander Vexner, your slave ships run through Sector 7 of the Outer Rim. Currently, you have approximately 200 million beings in forced labor. Children work in your mines until they die. Families are separated and sold to different worlds. The weak and the old are processed for protein paste." Vexner's scales shifted colors, a sign of rage in his species. "Those are lies. Propaganda. We have recordings." Wei-Lin pressed a control, and the holographic display changed. It showed ships with hegemony markings loading chained prisoners into cargo holds. It showed mining facilities where emaciated beings worked until they collapsed. It showed things that made representatives throughout the hall turn away in horror. "We've been watching for 300 years, Wei-Lin said quietly. "We didn't miss anything." The display changed again, showing atrocities committed by other powers. The Dominion's orbital bombardments. The Trade Consortium's manufactured famines. The Outer Rim Coalition's assassination programs. Species after species saw their darkest secrets displayed for the entire galaxy to witness. Silence fell over the hall. The great powers had nothing to say. For the first time in their long histories, they could not deny what they had done. Wei-Lin let the silence stretch before she spoke again. "Here are humanity's terms. They are not negotiable." She began to list them. First, all slave routes will be immediately closed. All enslaved beings will be freed and returned to their home worlds or given the choice of where to settle. The powers that operated these routes will pay reparations calculated based on the number of lives affected. Vexner started to object, but the look Wei-Lin gave him made him fall silent. Second, all colonies currently under forced tribute will be granted independence. They may choose to maintain trade relationships with their former rulers, but only on terms they freely accept. Economic coercion will be treated as a crime. Trademaster Yoanak of the Consortium made a strangled sound of protest. Third, the Galactic Assembly will be restructured. Every species will have an equal vote, regardless of military or economic power. Decisions will be made by true majority, not by threats and bribes. Impossible. Keth Vaughan finally found his voice. The great powers will never accept this. We built this civilization. We maintain order. Without us, without you, smaller species might actually have a chance to thrive. Wei Lin cut him off. Without you, beings might not live in constant fear of being conquered or enslaved. Without you, the galaxy might become something worth being part of. She paused. Fourth, the leaders responsible for the crimes documented in our evidence will face trial. Fair trials, with proper procedures and proportional justice. We're not asking for executions or revenge. We're asking for accountability. And if we refuse, Keth Voren demanded. If we choose to fight? Wei Lin had been waiting for this question. I hoped you would ask. She touched a control on the podium. Admiral Chun to eternal patience. Execute demonstration protocol. Target the fourth moon of the nearest gas giant. Fire when ready. Every eye in the hall turned to the holographic display. One of the massive human ships shifted position, moving out of formation. A weapon on its hull began to glow with light that seemed to come from somewhere else, somewhere beyond normal space. The beam it fired was almost invisible. A thin line of distorted space that crossed the distance to its target in less than a second. The moon, a rocky body roughly 2,000 kilometers across, simply ceased to exist. It didn't explode. It didn't break apart. One moment it was there, and the next moment it wasn't. The matter that had formed it converted directly into energy in a flash that overwhelmed every sensor in the system. When the sensors recovered, there was nothing left. Not debris, not dust, nothing at all. The silence in the hall was different now. It was the silence of beings who had just witnessed something beyond their understanding. Something that rewrote everything they knew about power and warfare. That weapon exists on every ship in our fleet, Wei Lin said quietly. Every single one. We could end this galaxy in an hour. We could destroy every planet controlled by every power that has ever oppressed the weak. She let that sink in. We built these weapons because we knew that when we finally revealed ourselves, the great powers would try to fight. They would refuse to change. They would rather destroy themselves and everyone around them than give up their power. Her voice softened. So we made sure that fighting wasn't an option. We made ourselves so overwhelmingly powerful that resistance became meaningless. Not because we wanted to use that power, but because we wanted to make sure we never had to. She looked out at the assembled species. We spent 300 years building weapons that could destroy everything. We did it so that we could afford to offer mercy instead. We did it so that when we came here today, we could give you a choice instead of an ultimatum. Keth Voren stared at her. What choice? You've made it clear we cannot fight. You can choose how this ends. Wei Lin's voice was almost gentle now. You can accept accountability for what you've done. You can help build something better. You can be part of the solution instead of the problem. She gestured at the data crystal. Or you can refuse. You can try to resist. You can make us use the power we've built. She shook her head. But I don't think that's what you want. And I know it's not what we want. Ambassador Yevanara of the Collective of Shao stood up. Her small form was almost invisible among the larger species, but something in her voice made everyone turn to listen. We will support humanity's terms, she said. The Collective of Shao has waited a very long time for someone to speak for the voiceless. We will not waste this chance. Other voices joined hers. Small species. Weak species. Species that had spent centuries suffering under the great powers. One by one, they stood and declared their support. The great powers watched their careful alliances crumble. They watched species they had long controlled suddenly find their courage. They watched as the galaxy they had built began to transform around them. And slowly, they began to realize that they had no choice at all. Not because humanity had made resistance impossible, but because humanity had shown the galaxy what was possible, and the galaxy was choosing something better. The small species kept standing. One after another, they rose from their seats and voiced their support for humanity's terms. Species that had been silent for centuries. Species that had learned to hide their suffering behind careful smiles and compliant words. Species that had lost hope so long ago that they had forgotten what hope felt like. Now they remembered. Ambassador Yevanara watched with tears streaming down her face. Her people had been waiting for this moment for over 2,000 years, ever since the Dominion of Tal had conquered their home world and turned them into servants. They had prayed for deliverance. They had dreamed of justice. They had never truly believed it would come. And now a species from a small blue planet had brought 1,000 battleships to answer those prayers. The great powers watched their carefully built order collapse around them. Allies turned against them. Client species refused their commands. The fear that had held the galaxy together for 10,000 years evaporated like morning dew. Ambassador Kethvarn made one last attempt. He stepped forward and raised his voice above the growing chorus of support. "This is madness. You're destroying everything we've built. Without the great powers to maintain order, the galaxy will fall into chaos. Species will fight each other. Civilizations will collapse. Is that what you want?" Admiral Wei Lin waited until he finished, then shook her head slowly. "You're describing the galaxy as it already exists, Ambassador. Species already fight each other. You just make sure the strong always win. Civilizations already collapse. You just make sure they're the civilizations you want destroyed. The order you've built isn't order. It's control." She stepped away from the podium and walked toward him. Her movement was unhurried, almost casual, but every eye in the hall followed her. "We're not destroying your order, Ambassador. We're replacing it with something better. Something where strength is used to protect instead of exploit. Something where every voice matters, not just the loudest." "And who will enforce these new rules?" Kethvarn demanded. "Who will maintain this new order? You?" "At first, yes." Wei Lin nodded. "We have the power to ensure the transition happens peacefully. Our ships will protect worlds that can't protect themselves. Our forces will shut down the slave routes and guarantee the safety of free beings. Our presence will prevent anyone from taking advantage of the chaos." She paused. "But we won't rule. That's not why we built this fleet. We built it to make change possible, not to become the next empire. Once the new system is stable, once fair institutions are in place, we'll step back." Kethvarn laughed bitterly. "And we should believe you? Every power that has ever existed has promised the same thing. They always say they want peace and justice. They always become the thing they claim to hate. Maybe." Wei Lin's voice was quiet. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we'll become corrupted by power like everyone else. Maybe in 1,000 years, humanity will be the great oppressor and some new species will have to overthrow us." She smiled slightly. "But I don't think so. Because we designed our entire civilization around preventing exactly that. We spent 300 years preparing, and most of that time wasn't spent building weapons. It was spent building systems to keep ourselves accountable. We have checks and balances built into every level of our government. We have mandatory rotation of power. We have institutions specifically designed to monitor and limit human authority." She turned to address the entire assembly. "We've studied your history. We've studied our own. We know how power corrupts. We know how good intentions turn into tyranny. And we've done everything we can think of to prevent it from happening to us." Wei Lin returned to the podium. "I can't promise we'll be perfect. No one can promise that. But I can promise that we'll try. And I can promise that we'll accept accountability if we fail. The same standards we're asking you to meet we'll meet ourselves. The hall was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the terrified silence of beings facing overwhelming force. This was the thoughtful silence of beings considering a genuine choice. Supreme Commander Vexner spoke first. His voice was heavy, with something that might have been defeat or might have been relief. The hegemony of Krull will accept your terms. We will close the slave routes. We will free those we have held in bondage. He paused. And I will face trial for my role in establishing those routes. Trademaster Ulinik stepped forward next. The Trade Consortium will submit to restructuring. We will compensate the species we have harmed through economic warfare. His voice cracked slightly. It is, perhaps, overdue. One by one, the great powers surrendered. Not to humanity's fleet, though that fleet made resistance impossible. They surrendered to something more powerful than weapons. They surrendered to the weight of their own crimes, finally spoken aloud. They surrendered to the hope in the eyes of the small species who were already celebrating their freedom. They surrendered because, for the first time in their histories, they had no choice but to face what they had become. Ambassador Kethvorn was the last. He stood alone as his allies abandoned him, as his carefully built coalitions dissolved, as the power he had spent a lifetime accumulating crumbled to dust. Finally, he spoke. The Dominion of Tal accepts your terms. I will stand trial for my actions. His skin shifted through colors that expressed emotions no human could read. Perhaps it is time to remember what we once were. Before we became this. Waylin nodded. That's all we ask, Ambassador. The chance to remember. The chance to become something better. She touched the podium controls one final time. The fleet will begin deploying to liberated territories immediately. Ships will be stationed at every major population center to ensure the transition happens peacefully. Tribunals will be established according to fair procedures, with judges selected from neutral species. She looked out at the assembly, at the great powers brought low, and the small species standing tall. This is not the end of anything. It's a beginning. The galaxy, you know, is gone. But the galaxy you could become is just starting to take shape. Waylin stepped away from the podium. Her aides flanked her as she walked toward the exit. Behind her, the assembly erupted into activity species meeting for the first time as equals. Former enemies tentatively reaching out to each other. Beings who had been voiceless finally finding their words. Ambassador Yevanara caught up with her at the door. Admiral Chun, I have to ask. The small being's voice trembled with emotion. Why? Your people had the power to rule the galaxy. Why did you choose this instead? Waylin stopped. She looked at the chaos of hope and uncertainty that was filling the great hall. She thought about 300 years of silence, of preparation, of building weapons that could destroy everything. Because someone had to be strong enough to choose mercy, she said finally. We made ourselves into monsters so that when we showed up, we could afford to be kind. She smiled a real smile this time, warm and tired and genuine. Humanity spent most of its history learning the hard way how power corrupts. We hurt each other terribly before we figured out how to do better. We almost destroyed ourselves half a dozen times. Her voice softened. We know what happens when the strong prey on the weak. We know what it costs. We built this fleet specifically so that we could make sure no one else had to pay that price. Yevanara looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took Waylin's hand in her small grip. Thank you, she said. On behalf of every species that suffered in silence. Thank you. Waylin squeezed her hand gently. Don't thank us yet. The hard work is just beginning. Building a fleet is easy compared to building a fair society. We're going to need help from species like yours, who know what oppression feels like and won't want to repeat it. You'll have it, Yevanara promised. Whatever you need. Waylin nodded. She walked out of the great hall, through the docking bay, and back to her shuttle. As it lifted off and carried her toward the eternal patience, she looked out at the 1,000 ships that surrounded the station. They had been built to end tyranny. They had succeeded. Now they would be used to protect something far more fragile and far more valuable: hope, across the galaxy. On 100 worlds, beings who had lived in fear for generations looked up at human ships appearing in their skies. They had been told to expect conquerors. Instead, they found liberators. The galaxy would never be the same. But for the first time in 10,000 years, that was a good thing. And it had all started with 300 years of silence and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to speak.